first affair shattered my trust, but the second one taught me that forgiveness without change is just a slower way to be destroyed. At first, that sounds like the kind of sentence people only say after years of therapy or after they have told the story so many times that the edges have gone dull. That was not how it felt while I was living it. While I was inside it, everything still looked ordinary enough that I kept trying to save the relationship from my own suspicions. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation smaller than betrayal, kinder than betrayal, easier to survive than betrayal. The truth did not care what I was ready for. When the first betrayal happened, I did what many people do when they still love the person who hurt them. I looked for a version of the story that would let me stay. We went to counseling. We cried in parking lots. We talked about childhood wounds, unmet needs, loneliness, stress, and all the other language people reach for when they want pain to become understandable enough to survive. I wanted to believe repair was possible, so I worked like my marriage depended on it. Because it did, the hardest part to explain to people who have never lived through this kind of betrayal is how ordinary love makes you vulnerable in practical ways. You build habits around a person. You assume cooperation. You stop scanning every interaction for danger because commitment is supposed to reduce that burden, not increase it. That is why the early warning signs are so easy to miss. They arrive inside normal life, mixed in with shared meals, errands, bills, inside jokes, and routines that still look solid from a distance. By the time suspicion feels serious, your heart is already heavily invested in preserving a life that may no longer exist in the form you believed. What I did not understand then was how much trust can disguise danger when you are invested in continuity. For a while, she seemed different, more transparent, more patient, more grateful. But if I am honest, there were cracks I did not want to name. She resented the consequences. She wanted the marriage back without wanting the cost of rebuilding it. She acted like my triggers were inconvenient, like my questions were punishments, like my damaged trust was a weather problem we both had to endure rather than a wound she had made with her own choices. I kept minimizing it because I wanted the relationship to remain something I could repair with patience rather than something I would have to survive by leaving. What made it worse was not just the event itself. It was the way each new detail forced older memories to change shape. Moments that once felt harmless became loaded. Conversations that once felt routine became suspicious in hindsight. That is one of the ugliest parts of infidelity and deception. It does not only injure the present, it reaches backward and contaminates the meaning of things you once held with trust. What nobody prepares you for is how much energy betrayal steals before the relationship even officially ends. You start rereading old moments, checking your own tone, wondering whether you missed something obvious or whether you were simply loyal in a world that rewards people who hide well. That internal spiral is exhausting because it turns your own memory into a witness you no longer fully trust. I lived inside that spiral longer than I should have, mostly because admitting the full truth would have required me to accept how much of my life was about to change. The second time came with less chaos and more horror because my body recognized it before my mind wanted to. There were familiar behaviors returning in updated forms, the hidden screen, the emotional absence, the defensiveness that arrived too quickly for innocent people. One evening, she left her smartwatch charging on the bathroom counter. A message flashed across it while she was downstairs. It was intimate, playful, and recent. I remember feeling cold before I felt angry, because repetition strips drama out of pain and replaces it with disgust. Once suspicion became evidence, I entered a phase I still do not remember fondly. It was part investigation, part emotional free fall. I was checking devices, dates, receipts, and timelines while also trying to function like a normal adult. Every confirmation hurt, yet every confirmation also made me calmer in one specific way. I was no longer crazy. I was no longer misreading tension. The story was real, and because it was real, I could finally stop wasting energy trying to explain away what my instincts had been flagging for far too long. There is always a physical moment when the body understands before the mind does. My stomach dropped, my breathing changed, and the room seemed to narrow around whatever proof I was holding. I checked more carefully this time because I had learned what betrayal looks like when it is still pretending to be manageable. The records showed a pattern already underway: secret lunches, Calls deleted from the phone bill but still visible in cloud sync. Money moved in small amounts, the kind designed not to trigger questions. The worst part was realizing she had learned from the first affair. She had become more careful, not more faithful. From that point on, I was no longer trying to decide whether something was wrong. I was trying to measure how long I had been living beside it without fully naming it. The scale of the truth matters because it changes the emotional category of what happened. That changed everything for me. The first affair could still be framed as collapse, weakness, confusion, damage, selfishness, or any of the softer words people use when they want redemption to remain possible. The second affair stripped those words of their value. It was no longer a mistake inside a broken season. It was evidence of character. It meant she had watched me bleed from the first betrayal, accepted my forgiveness, and then still chosen to risk doing it again. Once I understood that, I stopped asking whether the damage could be explained softly. I started asking whether I could respect myself if I kept staying inside a story that required me to deny what was already obvious. Even before I made any final decision, something in me had already started separating clarity from comfort. Comfort would have meant delaying the inevitable, softening language, and pretending confusion was still possible. Clarity meant naming what was in front of me without dressing it up. That shift hurt. But it also gave me back a level of internal steadiness I had been losing for a long time. Eventually there is always a confrontation, whether you want one or not. When I confronted her, she cried faster this time because she knew the script. That almost made it crueler. She offered explanation before accountability and emotion before truth. She talked about feeling trapped, misunderstood, and overwhelmed, as if my presence in the marriage had somehow cornered her into dishonoring it a second time. What she could not explain was why a woman who had been forgiven would choose secrecy again unless she had mistaken mercy for weakness. In that conversation, I learned something I have seen repeated in almost every betrayal story since. When someone has been lying for long enough, exposure does not automatically produce honesty. Often, it only produces a faster, more desperate form of strategy. I also learned that closure is rarely given cleanly by the person who caused the damage. More often, closure is assembled privately from facts, behavior, silence, and the eventual realization that you no longer need a better apology in order to make a better decision. That realization was painful because it forced me to stop waiting for the other person to become morally elegant after months of choosing something much uglier. After the confrontation, the aftermath begins, and the aftermath is rarely cinematic. It is practical, repetitive, humiliating, and emotionally expensive. That realization did more than end the marriage. It rearranged how I understood my own role in my life. I had believed love meant staying present through pain. I had believed that effort, empathy, and honesty could rescue two people if both of them wanted the same future. But we did not want the same future. I wanted something healed. She wanted something intact enough to keep comforting her while she kept living outside it. That stage taught me more about character than the actual discovery did, because it showed me who I was becoming under pressure and who the other person remained when the lies were no longer working. There is also a social cost to betrayal that people underestimate. You start thinking about who knew what, who suspected what, and who watched the relationship deteriorate without saying a word. Even when no one intended to humiliate you, the mere possibility that other people noticed pieces of the truth before you did can feel like a second wound. It is not pure ego. It is the pain of realizing your private devastation may have had an audience long before you had language for it yourself. And then comes the part no one glamorizes: the paperwork, the practical decisions, the humiliating phone calls, the explanations you owe people who were never in the room when your life actually broke. Meals still have to be made. Bills still have to be paid. Work still expects your attention. Meanwhile, your mind is replaying scenes it cannot fix. That contrast between ordinary responsibility and extraordinary pain is one of the loneliest parts of the whole process. In the end, my decision was less dramatic than people imagine and more important than any single argument. I left after the second betrayal with a different kind of sadness. The first time, I was desperate to save us. The second time, I was grieving the fact that I had spent so much of myself trying to rebuild with someone who was secretly still choosing destruction. Walking away hurt, but staying would have turned me into a man who participated in his own humiliation for the sake of a marriage that existed mostly in his memories. That decision did not erase grief. It simply gave grief a direction. Instead of circling endlessly around the betrayal, I began moving away from it, step by difficult step. Recovery did not begin with peace. It began with routine. I had to rebuild trust in small, unglamorous ways, by keeping promises to myself, by protecting my sleep, by speaking honestly to the people who had earned access to my life, and by refusing to keep confusing suffering with loyalty. That process was slower than I wanted and less dramatic than movies teach us to expect. But it was real, and reality mattered more to me now than performance ever could. A major part of recovery had nothing to do with the other person and everything to do with identity. I had to figure out who I was when I was no longer organizing my choices around managing their moods, their lies, or the fallout from their decisions. That sounds abstract until you live it. Then it becomes very practical. Different mornings, different habits, different spending, different boundaries, different standards for what gets access to your time. The rebuild was not only emotional, it was structural, and that structural change is what made the healing last instead of feeling temporary. Forgiveness is not the problem. Blind forgiveness is. If there is no change in character, no sustained honesty, and no willingness to carry the discomfort of rebuilding, then forgiveness becomes a gift laid at the feet of someone who only learns how to hurt you with better timing. The second affair taught me the difference between mercy and self-abandonment, and I do not confuse those things anymore. I do not tell this story because I enjoy revisiting it. I tell it because there are people still living inside the version of confusion I once called normal. If you are one of them, I hope you understand this. Clarity may arrive quietly, but once it arrives, it asks something of you. It asks whether you will keep protecting a lie because you are afraid of what truth will cost, or whether you will accept the cost and finally keep your own dignity intact. That choice is brutal. It is also where a real life starts again, and that is the part I wish more people understood. Betrayal is dramatic in the discovery, but its real meaning is revealed in what you do next. Do you go back to sleep emotionally because the truth is expensive? Or do you let that truth reorganize your life around something cleaner? That question changed everything for me. If you have lived through something similar, then you already know the answer is never simple.